Hi, this is Dr. Ron Mottern with Mottern Institute for Mind Body Wellness, and this is your weekly Words of Wellness. Now, this week is going to be a little bit longer because what I'd like to do this week is to look at the subject of addiction, especially from the aspect of choice theory psychology. So, this is covered in detail in my book, Choose Wisely, a cognitive behavioral substance abuse intervention program that also has some exercises to help people work through and what have you. I use that in my substance abuse treatment program. Also, I cover the theory itself in my book, Living Well, A Guide to Cognitive Behavioral Skills Exercises. So either one of those can give you sort of a overview of what we're talking about when we talk about the choice theory understanding of addiction. Now, this is essentially the explanation of why we do everything that we do, and that'll become more apparent as we go on. So, to begin with, choice theory says that we all have 5 basic needs. Now, some of you may be familiar with other needs theories. Certainly, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is well known. Some other theorists have some ideas about the needs and what have you. Ryan and Deci have some, etc. But choice theory, the 5 basic needs, we have 4 psychological needs and we have 1 physiological need. Now, the physiological need is the need for survival, for food, for water, for heat, for air. Okay. Then we have 4 psychological needs. And don't get hung up on the terms on these because any synonymous term stands for the same need. So one of those needs is love. We have a need for love, which is the same need as belonging, acceptance, to care for others, to feel cared for ourselves, a need for intimacy, etc. So there are different aspects of that particular need. So all of those terms are something that we use to help us describe what we're talking about when we talk about that particular psychological need. Another one is the need for power. Okay, that's the need for control, for recognition, for achievement, for respect. We probably have more words in the English language that have to do with that particular need than any of the others. We have the need for fun, which is the same as the need for learning. Fun and learning are the same need. So anytime we're having fun, we're learning something. I might be learning something and not having fun, but anytime I'm having fun, I'm learning something. So we see that we even see that in other mammals, right? Little tigers, little leopards, they're wrestling around with each other, they're playing, but they're also practicing, they're learning those fighting skills they'll use later in life. Maybe see a little leopard stalking butterflies through the long grass. It's having fun, it's out there enjoying itself, but it's also practicing those stalking skills that it's seen its mother use. So fun, learning, different aspects of the same need. Excitement is the same need. Creativity also falls in there. And then we have the need for freedom, independence, autonomy, choice, what have you. Now, it's very interesting that usually when I run groups, that particular need, even if we've gone over what the needs are and what have you over and over again, that's usually the last one to come up, that people will remember the others, but they tend to forget that one in this country. And I think that's a good indication that we have a lot of it. We don't pay attention to the air unless we're doing our diaphragmatic breathing or something like that because we do it automatically. Well, we get a lot of freedom and autonomy in this country, so it often is the need that when people are quizzed on it, have a hard time remembering. But those are the 5 needs that we have: the physiological need of survival, and then the need for belonging, for recognition, for fun, and for freedom. And once again, any synonymous term, different aspects of those terms. Now, those needs are first and foremost motivators. They motivate us to do everything that we do in this life, which is to say, everything we do in this life is an attempt to meet those needs. Okay? Now, when we get the needs met, we feel pleasure. Okay? We feel happiness. We're talking about the survival need, talk more about the pleasure need. Talk about the psychological needs, we're talking more about happiness. Okay? If we don't get those needs met, then physically we feel pain, psychologically we feel misery. So that's our understanding really of what those are. Now, the needs themselves, we call them motivators, but we often think that pain and pleasure are motivators. And from this standpoint, pain and pleasure are really not, because pain and pleasure are simply the gauges that tell us whether or not our needs are being met. So if I'm getting my needs met, I feel pleasure or happiness. If I'm not getting my needs met, then I feel pain or misery. So pain and pleasure really really the gauges that tell us whether or not these needs are being met for us. Now remember that the needs are first and foremost motivators, that everything we do in this life is an attempt to get those needs met. However, the needs are genetic. They're set, okay? Whatever level they're at, they're at. So if we looked on a scale of 0 to or 1 to 10, we all have the needs in some measure, so it's never going to be 0. But from 1 to 10, then we could look on there and we could come up with a bar graph, pathogram that tells us what those needs are. Now, when we looked at that, that would be subjective, okay? It's us looking back on our lives to decide this is how important this need has been to me overall over the years. On average, if I had to give one need up, which one need would go? If I could only keep one need, which one would I keep? So many different ways to help us to look at needs strengths, okay? Needs strengths. So if I were to do a profile, might say, and we're just looking at the psychological needs at this point. The physiological needs, the survival needs are still very important. Most of those in our society are easily met. However, those become important, and we'll talk about those a little bit later on. But right now, just focusing on psychological needs. If I was to look at my need for love, let's say it's a 5. Okay, no personal disclosure. This is just a random thing. So if we looked at the need for love, perhaps it's a 5. Me, once again, looking back on my life, this is a subjective measurement. If I looked at my need for achievement, however, that may be up there. That may be up there at maybe a 10. Okay. Looked at my need for excitement, that may be up there as well, maybe a 9. Okay. And then if I looked at the need for freedom, well, maybe a 4, something like that. Okay. So once again, just subjectively looking back to come up with a needs strength sort of profile for my basic needs. The needs, however, like we said, are genetic. Okay, whatever level they're at. They do not change. Okay, ever. Now you say, well, wait a minute. Sometimes I feel a little differently. Okay. For example, if I look at it not overall, but in the moment, right now my need for love and belonging may be a little higher, I think. I think it feels like it's an 8 at the present time. Need for recognition. It's my face on the screen. I'm doing the talking here. So that need for recognition may seem to be lower. Maybe it's a 4. Need for excitement. Oh yeah, I'm thrilled to do this. Okay, so it may be down there as well. Maybe it's a 2. Okay, and then the need for freedom, independence, what have you. Well, I don't know. I might be wanting to do other things right now instead of make a vlog. So maybe that's up there. Maybe that's a 7, somewhere up there. Now, remember what I said. The needs are genetic. They're set. They don't change. So how do we explain that? How do we explain how overall it seems to be one thing, while in the moment it seems to be nothing? It seems to be something else. Well, what we want to remember, once again, is the needs are motivators, okay? Now, to motivate means to move, right? So needs are what move us to do anything that we do. So if I'm getting my need met at the time, then I'm going to have a lower motivation to do something else to get that need met. If I'm not getting my need met at the time, I'm going to have a higher motivation to do something to get that need met. So what I'm feeling is indeed that sort of urge to fulfill the need itself. I'm being motivated by those needs to have them fulfilled. And the needs will drive us to do whatever it is that needs to be done in order to meet those needs. There's nothing that says that the need, whatever we do to meet the needs has to be good for us. Okay, so this is where we start talking about doing things that are bad for us, doing things that may fall into the addictive category, things like that. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So another way to think about those psychological needs and how they motivate and what have you is to think about the physiological needs. Think about the survival needs. We have that need for food, for water, for heat, and for air. Those are the survival needs. Now the biggest of those needs is what? It's air, right? You can live 3 to 5 minutes without air generally. Okay, there are people who can go much longer, but for most of us, 3 to 5 minutes is about it. Okay, the next one would be water, 3 to 5 days without water, then 3 to 5 weeks without food, some of us maybe a little bit more, and then we have the need for heat. As long as we're not in hypothermia, we're endothermic mammals, we create our own heat, so we're pretty good there. And those needs will never change. There's never going to be a time when I can go 3 to 5 days without air or 3 to 5 weeks without water. It's not going to work. Okay, so those needs are set. Whatever level they're at, and we know what those levels are for survival. However, if I just had a big meal, okay, that need for food may appear to me much lower. Remember that we're sort of the gauge is there. What motivates to do these things? Pleasure and pain, right? So I may have hunger pangs, right? So that may tell me you need to eat, right? If I haven't had anything to drink for a while, that thirst, what we call that, may tend to rise, right? That thirst starts to rise as the longer I go without having anything to drink. It motivates me to go get something to drink. So we can sort of understand the motivation aspect by looking at the physiological needs and applying that to the psychological needs because they work the same way. So whatever level they're at. Food, water, heat, and air are all in there, right? Air being first, water, food, and then heat. Okay, so those are not going to change. Even if I am starving to death, then if somebody jumps out, throws a chokehold on me, that need for air is going to assert itself as primary. And the fact is, unless you're doing your breathing exercises like we do and what have you, how often do we think about breathing? We don't, right? Because it's part of the autonomic nervous system. We do it automatically. So we don't even think about that because it's something that happens automatically. So as our needs are met, our motivation to do something tends to be lower. As our needs are not getting met, then the motivation to do those appears to be higher. Remember, the needs themselves stay where they are, but the motivation is what increases and decreases. And one need can't fulfill the other. So if I have too much love and belonging and not enough power and recognition, one doesn't fulfill the other. These needs are distinct. They are separate. Okay, can't pour into a different cup. It's its own cup there. If we could do that, then they wouldn't be motivators. Okay, so they would just level out and provide no motivation whatsoever. Okay, so that's just basically an explanation, a brief explanation of the needs. However, like we said, the needs are genetic. Okay, we don't go around with a knowledge of this in our head. In fact, you may have never heard of the needs before prior to this time. However, what we do know about is our wants. Okay, I want this, I want that. Now, the wants are reflections of the needs. Okay, the wants are reflections of the needs. So if I said, what do you want? You say, well, I want a red Ferrari. Okay, well, if you had a red Ferrari, what would that mean to you? Well, if I had a red Ferrari, all the guys would be envious of me, girls would want to ride with me. I'd get in it, drive real fast, go wherever I wanted to go. Okay, all right. So guys would be envious of me, fulfills that need for recognition. Girls are going to want to ride with me, fulfills that need for belonging, right? Get in it and drive real fast, fulfills that need for fun. In fact, that's the tagline for Ferrari, right? Most fun you can have with your pants on. And then get it and drive wherever I wanted to go. That fulfills that need for freedom. Now, if I had a yellow gremlin, okay, and some of you may be old enough to remember the gremlin. If I had a yellow gremlin, could I still have fun in my yellow gremlin? Sure, I could have fun in my gremlin. Okay, could I get in my gremlin and go wherever I wanted to go? Sure, I could do that as well. Girls going to want to ride in my gremlin? Well, not unless probably they didn't have anything else to ride in. Guys going to be envious of my gremlin? Probably not. Okay, so when I say that what I want is a red Ferrari, what I'm generally talking about is saying that the needs for recognition and for belonging are what are motivating me at this point. Now we see how that one need, how that one thing that I want can fulfill all of those. That red Ferrari fulfills all four of those psychological needs. Okay, but it probably fulfills that need for recognition and for belonging better than it does the other needs. And if I had a silver Bentley Rolls, think that women would want to ride with me? Probably. Okay, I haven't met many who wouldn't. And then if I had that silver Bentley, I think the guys would be envious of me. Probably as well, right? Sort of a status symbol there. So I didn't want a silver Bentley though. I wanted a red Ferrari, and the red Ferrari. The fact that it's red should have told me something, right? That need for recognition is probably the biggest one of those. So the wants are reflections of the needs, and that's what we're tuned into. I want this, I want that, and we want these things because it either meets our needs, it's met our needs in the past, so we want it because we know it'll meet our needs, or we think it will meet our needs. Okay, now I don't do anything, okay, I don't engage in any behavior, okay, as a pattern of behavior that does not meet my needs. If I'm doing it over and over again, I'm doing it because it meets my needs. Now people say, well, wait a minute, this is what you're doing is harmful to you. Why would you continue to do that? Remember, the needs don't care. The needs don't care whether it's harmful to me or not. They're not some sentient presence, right? The needs are simply genetic constructs that say this needs to be met. Okay, I need to be met, and you will meet me. Okay, those needs will be met. And remember that the longer I go without it, then the more misery and the more pain I'm going to feel. Okay, and people with a high tolerance for misery, a high tolerance for suffering, in some aspects that can be good, and in other aspects that can be bad, because I just tend to put up with it and put up with it and put up with it instead of doing something different to get the need met. So that can be a problem sometimes. So the wants are reflections of the needs. Okay, as we go through sort of what we're going through, sort of the stations of the mind here. Okay, now those things that get us what we want and meet our needs the best get to be pictures in what we call the quality world. Now, the quality world we look at as a place in the mind, right? It's a wonderful euphemistic term. If you want to look at in other ways, then you can read my paper on populating the quality world, a neurobiological understanding of that. That's in the International Journal of Choice Theory and Reality Therapy. And basically what we're talking about when we talk about the quality world is some long-term memory stuff. Once again, if you want a more precise understanding of that, you can look up the article in the International Journal of Choice Theory and Reality Therapy. But that quality world is sort of like a mental mosaic. We talk about it like it's a picture album. Those things which meet our needs get to be pictures in that quality world. Okay, now we don't just put them in and take them out like that. You need to think about the old Polaroids, right, where you took the picture and then you had to wait a little while and shake it around, and then eventually the picture appeared, right? So as we do things in our life that meet those needs for us, those pictures develop in our quality world. Those become part of the long-term memory that we have. And once again, it doesn't matter whether whatever we're doing is good for us or not, as long as it meets the needs. Now, once a picture gets in the quality world, it is in there forever. Okay, it does not come out. So, for example, I have a picture of dear old mom in my quality world. Most of us have a picture of dear old mom in her quality world from when we were kids. She met our needs for us, even the survival needs, so her picture gets to be in the quality world. However, if your old mom dies, okay, she's no longer meeting my needs, okay, when does her picture leave my quality world? Never, right? That picture is always going to be there because we human beings have this thing called memory, right? We reminisce on these things. We can think about the past, and in some slight way, we can get those needs sort of met. It's not met enough to have a long-term effect on it, but it does have an effect, right? We can remember these things. I can remember the love your old mom had for me and I had for her. So that picture stays in the quality world. Okay. Now, things that meet our needs in the present are very bright. They're very vibrant. Okay. Those photographs are very colorful. They're right there. Over time, the other pictures that aren't meeting our needs anymore. Mom's gone. She's not meeting those needs. So that picture is going to fade just like an old photograph. Once again, it's never going to fade completely because I'm always going to hold that in there. But it doesn't meet my needs that well anymore. So it begins to fade. Okay. And this is really also an explanation of grief. Why do we grieve so when somebody we care for passes away, even pets and things like that? When they pass away out of our lives, well, why does that affect us the way it does? Well, it's because in essence, that picture has been ripped out of our quality world at that time, that we can't get our needs met, and that really the depths of grief that we go through is really us, the pain that we have trying to meet those needs. Once again, that's telling us you got to do something to meet those needs, but at the time we don't really know how. This was a major need fulfiller for me in my life. This person was, or this behavior that I was engaged in was fulfilling those needs for me. So, and then all of a sudden it's gone. Even if it's over time, even if it's a long illness, a chronic illness, cancer, things like that, we know that it's going to happen. Alzheimer's, these things, we know that there's an end point coming. But when it comes, it's still very tragic. It's still very traumatic. I feel a lot of grief over that and what have you. And that pain that we feel is really that level of need fulfillment that we had and then that we don't anymore. And that pain is what that is. So anyway, so we get those pictures in the quality world, and this is the same way that we get any kind of behavioral addiction in there, but especially alcohol and other drugs. Okay, now, alcohol and other drugs are sort of unique. Okay, now a picture gets in the quality world ultimately by causing pleasure. Okay, now pleasure is the accumulation of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens of the brain. Okay, so it doesn't matter what causes me pleasure. Okay, whatever it is, it's an accumulation of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens of the brain. If I like bikes and I see a sweet bike riding down the road, dopamine was released in the brain. I get that feeling of pleasure. Okay. Same thing with alcohol and other drugs. Okay, alcohol and other drugs fool the brain into thinking that the needs have been met because alcohol and other drugs, by their very nature, cause a dopamine release in the brain. So it may be something that doesn't really fulfill a need for me, but it may make the misery of not having the needs met go away because it causes that release of dopamine, fools the brain into thinking the needs are being met, so it becomes a picture in the quality world in that way. Okay. Now, the other way, like we said, is just like any other behavioral picture gets in there, is the act of using may fulfill our needs for us. Okay, remember that old show, Cheers, right? You may, once again, I'm using some old references. But you may remember that old show, Cheers, right? The guy walks into the bar and everybody goes, Norm, okay? So needs for recognition are met going into the bar, okay? Did he get a sense of belonging when he was at the bar, old Norm there, when he went in there? Sure he did. We could see the camaraderie and things that go on. Okay, did he have fun when he was in there? Seemed to, right? Seemed to have a good time. To get a sense of freedom while he was there. Yes, he was always trying to get away from his wife Vera and what have you. So all of those psychological needs were met for that character by going into the bar. Okay, and these are the same that's met for most other people. Okay, as far as using alcohol and other drugs. If I'm out drinking with my buddies on Saturday night, and I get that sense of belonging. Okay, may get a sense of control, especially if I'm drinking, because that's what alcohol does. It's sort of unique among the drugs in that the more I use of it, the less control I have over myself, but the more control I think I have over myself. So it's sort of an interesting split. So I'm actually have less control, but I think I have more control. So get those hand signals there. So alcohol especially is related to the control need. Do I have fun when I'm out there doing that? Sure. Okay, get away from the job, get away from maybe everything, all the stresses of my life. Sure, I can do that as well. Okay, so it meets all those needs being out there doing that. So it allows me to fulfill my needs in a particular way. And so it gets to be a picture in my quality world. These days we're facing an opioid epidemic, right? People are using opioids. A lot of that has to do with perhaps they're becoming physiologically addicted because of chronic pain and things like that they may have had. And they may have tried this Oxycontin especially, right? Very addictive. Okay? It doesn't take a whole lot to get you addicted to that. So people try that, causes the release of that dopamine in the brain, causes me to feel good, okay? Gets to be a picture in the quality world, and the brain is going to retain that picture for a very long time. So that picture gets in there, and that is my go-to, okay? What do I need to do to feel good? What do I need to do to feel happy? Okay, is to do that. Now this is one place where we really have to make a differentiation between pleasure and happiness. Okay, not the same thing. Okay, pleasure, physiological feeling. Happiness is a psychological state. Okay, so pleasure and happiness, if nobody's ever told you, those are two different things. But we often confuse those. Okay, so the body physiologically, what is it going to go for? It's going to go for pleasure, right? That's what it's after. Those pictures of alcohol and other drugs get to be in our quality worlds in one of two ways, right? One way, the drug itself fools the brain into thinking that the needs are being met, so it gets to be in there. The other way that it gets in there is simply that the behavior, the act of using, okay, fulfills one or more or all of those basic needs for them, basic psychological needs. One of the things that people often ask when we talk about something like PTSD, okay, now we know these days PTSD is considered a trauma disorder. It's not considered a stress disorder anymore. But they'll say, well, wait a minute, these things in your quality world, these are things that meet your needs. These are things that you want. Well, I got some pictures going on in my head that I don't want and I can't seem to get rid of. So why are they there? Why do I have these traumatic images in my head that are messing me up in my life? I certainly don't want them there. Well, remember that most of the time we talk about those psychological needs. For something like PTSD, what we have to look at is the survival need. No matter how traumatic the experience was that I went through, no matter what it was, I lived through it. I survived, okay? For whatever reason, I survived. And the brain, because it is a survival thing, the brain picked that up and stored that in memory. So those traumatic memories and things that I have are really the brain trying to help me. Okay, it's the same thing with alcohol and other drug addiction. Okay, once again, the brain thinks the needs are being met, so that's what it's going to do. It's going to motivate you to do more of those. From a choice theory perspective, and things like addiction, whatever addiction it may be, especially alcohol and other drugs, is that the brain is not broken. Okay, the brain is working exactly how the brain is supposed to work, and it works that way with alcohol and other drugs. Works that way with cutting, right? People have an addiction perhaps to cutting. They cut themselves all the time. Why do they do that? because they're experiencing, much of the time, they're experiencing some severe psychological distress, some very psychological misery. So when they cut themselves, that physical pain takes away the psychological misery and actually makes them feel better because of that. Same reason that people get addicted many times to alcohol and other drugs. I have misery in my life. Your old mom dies, right? Massive misery there. How do I deal with it? I deal with it by using. So I learned that if I want to deal with this misery, deal with this pain in one way, I can take it out by doing something else. So PTSD, same sort of thing, okay? And I don't know that we really look at it that way sometimes, but PTSD is really the brain trying to help us, the brain working exactly as the brain is supposed to work. Whatever it was that I lived through it. And because it was a survival thing, then especially because it was a survival thing, the brain picked that up and it stores those images in that quality world. Not because I want them, but because, once again, whatever it was I lived through, I survived, okay? And it stored those in there. So one of the, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but one of the ways that we sort of look at treatment for PTSD, especially from the choice theory perspective, is that really I have to do some cognitive restructuring and some self-talk and what have you. When I start to have those things, really tell myself, right, talk to my brain, right, and tell my, I appreciate what you're doing right now. I appreciate you're trying to help me survive, but that really isn't necessary. That's not what's going on, because we also become hypersensitive to those triggers that set those sort of things off. So I just have to tell myself that, this is, I appreciate the brain, what you're doing for me, but I really don't need that right now. Okay, just shut that down for a little while. So once again, we get those pictures in the quality world that meet those needs in some way. Now, from the quality world, we go to this place in the stations of the mind that's called the comparing place, right? Now, the comparing place we sort of visualize as a set of scales, where one scale represents what I want, the other scale represents what I've got in reality, okay? And the difference between what I want and what I've got is that motivation, right? The difference between what I want and what I've got is my problem, okay? That's what a problem is, right? I want something and I ain't got it, okay? So that's the difference between those. We're always trying to balance those, but once again, those needs are always fluctuating up and down. I may be sitting here talking to you, and I'm Dr. Mottern and what have you, and in a few minutes my wife's going to say, get in here and take the garbage out, right? Oh, well, Dr. Mottern, get in here, professor, take that garbage out. So we're always sort of on a roller coaster, always trying to balance that scale, right, of those needs. But once again, when they're off, our problem, okay, I have something I want but I don't have, that's sort of that space is where that motivation is. And once again, okay, anytime there's an imbalance in those scales, then I get a physical feeling of frustration, okay? I get a physical feeling of frustration. And that's what frustration is. Remember, that's what I want something and I don't have it. I have unfulfilled desire, right? That's frustration. Anytime I feel that physiological feeling of frustration, I may not be aware of it, but anytime it's there, then that kicks in what's called the creating place, okay? Now the creating place is sort of the black box of the mind, okay? So what the creating place does is it just creates behavior, okay? As human beings, all we do is do things, okay? Even if I'm just laying on the ground, I'm still doing something as I'm laying there, okay? So once I have that physical feeling of frustration, that sort of black box of the mind kicks in, that creating place kicks in, it just creates behavior. And as I do things, if it doesn't work for me, if it doesn't fulfill my needs, then I don't do it anymore. If it does fulfill my needs, however, then it becomes a pattern of behavior. Now, all behavior is what's called a total behavior, and we've talked about total behaviors before. And we have our total behavior car, right, that we have here. So now, just to go into it a little more, if we use the example of the car, we're going to say that this is a front-wheel drive car. Okay, we'll just make that stipulation up. This is a front-wheel drive car, no matter what it is. Okay, we're saying it's a front-wheel drive car. So the engine, which drives our car, is those needs. Okay, remember the needs are first and foremost motivators. To motivate means to move. So just like an engine moves the car, those needs move us. We don't have direct control over those. Okay, they're genetic. Okay. However, what I do have control over is the steering wheel. Okay, so I have that steering wheel in my car. Always have my hands. Nobody drives my car but me. Okay, I'm the only one who drives my car. That's me in the driver's seat. Okay, so I have that steering wheel, and that is the wants. Okay, now I can steer that steering wheel one way or the other. I can change what I want. I can't change what I need. I can change what I want. I want dear old mom. Okay, I want Betty Sue, who was my girlfriend in high school. Can't have them. So I can steer that car in a different direction to get what I want. I do that because that steering wheel, that steering column comes down, connects that front axle across those front two wheels there, okay? And those front two wheels over which I have direct control are thinking and doing. I'm always in direct control of what I choose to think and what I choose to do. Now, do not confuse this with the fact that, you know, if I have a clap of thunder, and we've talked about this before, if I have a clap of thunder, somebody yells, jumps out and yells boo, something like that, I have an initial physiological response to that. I may feel something, I may think something, and things are going on, or I may jump back and do things like this, whatever it happens to be. But I choose whether to continue on that path, okay, or to continue with that thought, continue with that behavior. That is entirely up to me. I can change that directly, okay? All right. Now, the back wheels, which follow along, right? They go where it's front-wheel drive car. They go wherever the front wheels take them. Are emotions and physiology, what I'm feeling both emotionally and physically. I have indirect control over those. So if I want to change how I feel, either emotionally or physically, I change what I think and I change what I do. And once again, you know, the shark jumps up at me on the boat. I'm going to feel frightened, right? But I don't have to remain there. If shark goes back down in the water, I'm still on the boat. Okay? I say, well, I'm never going on boats again. I develop an irrational fear of something. Okay? That's a choice. Okay? I can choose to change that thinking in order to change that emotion. Okay? Same thing with physiology. I don't want to go into that a whole lot, but we've talked about that before. We have some people who have some very miraculous stories, okay? Both positive and negative, right? The positive ones, Norman Cousins' Anatomy of an Illness, right? Where he overcame some degenerative disorders based on changing his outlook, changing the way he thought, right? Which changed his emotion, which changed the physiology. Remember, emotions and physiology are on the same axle as well, on that back axle, okay? And then sort of the other direction of that is that we know certain tribes and things like that, people can will themselves to die. Okay, so will the body to shut down. So that thinking that goes on can affect physiologically what goes on. It can work to heal, or it can work in destructive ways. So that's the total behavior, right? Remember, all behavior that we engage in is a total behavior. You could make this car analogy even further and what have you. Remember that I'm always driving my car, so I may have somebody sitting in the driver's seat who's telling me to do things, but I don't have to do it because I'm the one who has the steering wheel. Okay, somebody may be standing outside the car yelling at me to do things. I don't have to do them if I don't want to because I'm driving my car. I may even have voices coming over my stereo telling me how to do things, but I don't have to do them. They're just voices over my steering wheel. Over my stereo. I've still got the steering wheel in my control. It's my car. And that total behavior that we have, we act on that in the outside world, and then that cycle continues, right? Does it meet my needs? Does it get me closer to what I want? If it does, then I continue that behavior. It becomes a pattern of behavior. If I don't, if it doesn't meet my needs, then I just do something else. I try something else. Black box of mind, that creating place, comes up with another behavior. So when we look at mental health issues, especially from, and this, once again, it works with any behavior, right? But especially the ones that interest us are sometimes the mental health issues. Then we look at why do people do these things, especially substance abuse, right? Why does somebody continue to do this over and over again? Because it meets the needs. Whatever it is I'm doing meets my needs. Now we, from an outside observer, may not see how is this meeting the needs. Well, it may not meet them very well, but it's the best thing that meets them at the time. Why do I engage in the behavior in which I engage? Because it's the best thing I know to do at the time. If I knew how to do something better, I'd do it. Okay? So, when we talk about treatment for things like substance abuse, for alcohol and other drugs, right? For any sort of addictive behavior, what we have to do is I can't just tell the brain, oh, well, you know what, we're just going to get rid of this, because it doesn't work. It's a picture in the quality world. It is there forever. Okay? What I have to do is I have to come up with other pictures that I place in my quality world that fulfill those needs. At that point, it becomes a choice. I can steer my car toward this picture, or I can steer my car toward another picture. But at that point, it becomes a choice. Which way am I going to go? Now, remember that if I stop doing something like using, okay, alcohol and other drugs, cutting, it doesn't matter what it is that I was doing before, if I just stop that, then whatever need that was fulfilling when I did it is not going to be being met. And I'm going to feel misery. And if I feel misery, I'm going to want to start up doing that all over again. Okay? So between the time I stopped doing what was harmful for me, that met the needs, and start doing something else that's better for me, that meets the needs, during that time, there's going to be a period of time I'm going to be miserable in my life. Okay? And this is some interesting research just came out recently that talked about people in recovery, and one of the biggest thing about helping in recovery was that feeling of happiness, right? When I didn't have that feeling of happiness, that caused me to relapse, caused me to go back to doing what I was. And we understand why that is. Why is that? Well, that's what we just explained, right? Because when we're feeling happy, that means the needs are being met. So whatever I'm doing, I used to use, not doing that anymore, I'm doing something else, I'm finding a way to fulfill those needs, that's making me happy. Okay? Now I can always choose to go back and do that again. That's what relapse is, right? And that's sort of how we understand relapse. Once again, is that picture is always in my quality world. Now, in 12-step groups and AA and things like that, they talk about, they say, I'm a recovering alcoholic, I'm a recovering addict, right? They say there's no real cure for that. And we can understand that sort of from the, don't necessarily believe it, but we can understand it from the perspective of that picture of me using. A picture of me drinking is always going to be in my quality world. Okay, we could say the same thing about anything. I'm in recovery from depression. I'm in recovery from whatever. And actually, if you look at the diagnosis in the DSM, that's sort of what it says, right? Once I have that diagnosis stays with me forever. So if I was depressed, then that diagnosis for depression is going to stay with me my entire life. It may be in remission, but it's still there. Okay, so sort of the same thing. And we understand that once again from that picture. Once it gets in the quality world, it is there forever. So what do I have to do if I want to change that? I've got to find other ways to fulfill the need. Okay, this is especially hard sometimes for young people who don't have life experience. One of the things that life experience gives us is gives us different options. I discover different ways to fulfill my needs. Okay, just for the fact that I've lived an experienced life. I experience more things. I find new ways to meet my needs. This is why when we talk about something like midlife crisis, or we know that something like psychopaths, right? Psychopaths about middle age, they tend to calm down a little bit. Not that they don't become psychopaths anymore, but they may have been more violent prior to that, more psychopathic in their behaviors prior to that. But about middle age, they sort of start to level out there. Same sort of thing. Our needs, our priorities seem to change in midlife and what have you. They don't really change. Remember, the needs are set. Generally what happens is about that time we have enough life experience at that point to where we have many different ways to get our needs met. So it seems like, once again, I have motivation is less to do certain things because of the experience I have, and I'm just getting those needs met, sort of like breathing, sort of in an unconscious way. So anyway, so those needs must be met once again, and we will do whatever we have to do, even if it's bad for us, even if it kills us, right? We will do that to get those needs met. So we have to find new ways to do that. I have to find, especially in recovery, right, with alcohol and other drugs, I have to find new ways to fulfill those needs to have that level of happiness. And remember, between the time I stop doing what I was doing and I find something else, there's going to be a period of time where I'm going to be miserable, okay? But hope and faith that gets me through that, right? I have hope that I'm going to find something else. I have faith that I'm going to find new behaviors, new ways to meet my needs, and what have you, in ways that don't hurt me or other people, okay? So that's sort of the brain as a control system. That sort of explains the concept of addiction. Why do we do things over and over and over again, even if they're bad for us? Because it meets those basic needs. Once again, this is not the brain being broken. Nothing wrong with the brain. The brain's working exactly as the brain is supposed to work. Okay? It just tends to be, we've just chosen a bad way to do that. So what do? We find a good way to do that. William Glasser talked about that many years ago in his book, Positive Addiction. There are things I can do that fulfill my needs that are positive for me. Some of the things back in the day when he was writing that were transcendental meditation, okay, which still fulfills the needs, okay. Running is another one that did that. These days, what we talk about, especially, like we said, we're talking about young people and life experience and what have you, is flow. Okay, that concept of flow. Csikszentmihalyi, you can look him up, and there's books on flow and his work on flow. Kotler and Wheel these days are doing a lot of work with the Flow Genome Project and things like that. That's where we go. So Glasser sort of presaged these studies with his idea of positive addiction back then. But that's what we want. We want a positive addiction. There's nothing wrong with addiction as long as it's not hurting me and not hurting others. Now we can take those to extreme limits. Once again, okay, running can become an addiction to many people where it actually is hurting them and not helping them. It's hurting others, hurting their relationships and what have you. So anything we do can become bad if we do too much of it. Okay, but we want to fulfill needs and meet those basic needs through our behaviors. That's our understanding of addiction. Understanding of relapse, once again, is because that picture is in the quality world and it's there forever. It doesn't go away. I just have to populate that quality world with other things that fulfill the needs, and then make that choice to choose those other things that meet my needs. At which point that picture of whatever the addictive behavior is will begin to fade over time. Okay, so, and there's certainly skills that we can learn to help us cope as we have to make it through that transition. Many of those you can find in my new book, Living Well, The Guide to Cognitive Behavioral Skills Exercises. Remember what I've went through just now. If you want sort of a written version, a more complete version, you can find that in Living Well, and especially in the Cognitive Behavioral Substance Abuse Intervention Program, Choose Wisely, which also goes through exercises for each of those stations of the mind and helps look at what is really going on. How do I understand this, and how can I apply this to my life? So that's our lengthy words of wellness for today. If you have questions, be sure to contact us. You can contact us through our website, www.motterninstitute.com. You can also contact us through our Facebook page at facebook.com/Mottern Institute. So that has been the Weekly Words of Wellness. Thank you for your attention.